Hey there, welcome back to the table, and to this, the first best of 3. In this video series, we're going to be looking at 3 different games that have something in common, be it a mechanic, designer, artist, or subgenre, and see what makes those games great and what makes them different from each other. Today we're going to be looking at probably the most overused theme in board gaming there is, zombies. If you've spent any amount of time in a board game cafe or in your local game store, I'm sure you've seen the lumbering undead on some of those boxes. BGG has over 500 entries for different games and expansions with the zombie genre, so we've really got our work cut out for us. Anyway, I went through BGG's zombie games and pulled out 3 of the highest rated, and we're going to have a closer look at them today to see what makes them so good. Today we're going to be looking at Played Hat Games' Dead of Winter, Cool Mini or Not's Zombicide franchise, and finally, Flying Frog's Last Night on Earth. So let's get these games out and see what they bring to the table. So what do these games have in common? Well, apart from the obvious walking corpses, we've got a few mechanical and thematic similarities, which might give us a good indication of what makes a great zombie game. I've played all of these games multiple times, and from that I believe that there are several common elements to these games, and those are cooperation, horror, a heavy emphasis on scavenging and survival, and an unrelenting mass of the dead. So let's take a closer look at those major elements. As soon as your game involves The Walking Dead, you've got some horror themes. And while there are plenty of parodies and subversions of that genre, you're always going to have a little bit of the spooky side to your game. So how do these games bring the scares? Well, let's start with Zombicide, which has about as much subtlety as I've come to expect from a Cool Mini or Not project. Zombicide's box is filled to bursting with plastic men and monsters. And if we take a look at a game in progress and check in on our plucky survivors, well, there's certainly more monsters than men. Zombicide builds fear and tension by creating an overwhelming situation full of panic for the players, as every single turn more and more zombies lumber onto the board until a tide of them will crash down upon you. Every undead you kill is just another body waiting to spawn. This method of building tension is simple and effective. As the board fills up, the stakes rise, and stand and fight becomes very quickly a mad dash to the exit. Next, we have Last Night on Earth, which eschews the Horde for a smarter and crueler wave of the undead, one controlled by one of your friends at the table, under the title of the Zombie Master. These zombies move unnervingly towards the worst possible places, and are far harder to put down than Zombicide's mindless Horde. Not only does your friend control the dead, they also have a collection of nasty cards and tricks to make sure that you're never truly safe. The game proudly wears its kitsch inspirations as badges of honor, and each of these cards are B-movie tropes and classic movie moments. These cards, combined with the fact that players can die, which Zombicide considers an instant loss, creates that movie feeling that it's only a matter of time until the worst thing happens. Be it that your beloved chainsaw breaks, that zombie you put down wasn't really dead, or perhaps worst of all, 2 characters commit the ultimate horror faux pas and give in to their carnal urges and lose their entire turns. Finally, we have Dead of Winter and its creeping dread. Dead of Winter is a much slower game, less concerned with the adrenaline-filled fight with the undead, and more with the idea of survival in a brutally hostile environment. It is The Walking Dead to Zombicide's Dawn of the Dead. Food gets used up, materials run low. That one injury slows you down, and finally, can you trust the survivors next to you? Yes, that's right, Dead of Winter has a hidden traitor mechanic, so paranoia and infighting are rife. The horror of Dead of Winter is a slow and existential one, punctuated by sudden moments of heartbreak, as death is always close and waiting to pounce. So let's compare. Now, while there are some obvious overlaps in these games, we could say that these 3 specialize in different kinds of horror: panic, tension, and dread. Now, these different kinds of horror are the core of these games and the creation and motivation for your players, as well as the theme and the narrative kind of stories that we're going to have. But it means that one of them is always going to be kind of a better fit for you and your friends. But as for which, that depends on your group and their affinities towards different kinds of horror. If you're going to live through these games, you're going to need to scavenge to do it. From bats to bullets, food to fuel. Every single one of these games is going to have your characters upending stockrooms and searching through abandoned houses, desperately trying to find something to fend off the undead. But how is survival really built into these three different games? Dead of Winter has by far the most extensive scavenging and survival system of these three games. Different locations contain different kinds of goods and in different amounts, forcing players to need to think hard about where they're going to go, which resources you and the colony most need, and if you can even afford that risk. Different characters are better at fighting or better at searching, so every turn players get this deliciously deep time management game as they send members of their personal group out, negotiate with other players on what needs to be done, and all while fighting against that clock. The shambling, flesh-eating clock. Finally, we need to talk about Dead of Winter's survivors and the Crossroads deck. This is this game's unique mechanic, and it was really built from the ground up around this deck of cards. Each turn, a player is going to draw one of these and check for a condition during that turn. Maybe someone gets in a fight. Maybe someone goes to the library. Maybe Bill is out on the board somewhere. Every one of the characters in this game is their own character with their own name, skills, and backstory. And they each have a unique Crossroads card to go with it. This deck sets aside these incredible, unique narrative explorations and narrative moments in the game that set it aside from other games in the zombie genre and other games in the market in general. This brings up some really interesting moral and ethical situations, forcing the players to make tough choices involving the tough conditions that this game so gleefully sets up for you. Do you bring those wounded survivors back to the colony, or do you leave them out there to fend for themselves, with too many mouths back at home already? These conditions and cards add some incredible human elements to these stories of survival and inject some real drama into your game. Zombicide's situation is more obviously dire, and so the survival mechanics are a little more obvious, we shall say. At the start of each of Zombicide's campaign missions, players start with some woeful equipment, which you'll want to replace as soon as you possibly can. So players rush into rooms and start ransacking, looking for weapons, equipment, and more. Searching is one of the actions a player can take. Once per turn, they can take the top card from this huge deck of equipment. It's simple, fast-paced, and instantly rewarding. There is a chance of finding and spawning more of the undead, but you will always get something. In Zombicide Invader, the game on display here, the survivors are split between the hardier soldiers and the more ingenious civilians, and this adds a limitation of who can search in certain rooms, with the bulky soldiers only being allowed to search the far rarer red security rooms. This random searching can lead to some odd situations. For example, an oxygen room that is surprisingly well stocked with flamethrowers. But it does play into the far more comedic tone that Zombicide has going for it. The combat is the real core of this game, with players chucking fists full of dice, aiming for different numbers to smash, cut, and blow away the horde. Every kill is experience for the players, and the characters get some unique skills as they level up. It's incredibly gratifying to see your plucky survivor turn into a grizzled veteran, though as they do get tougher, so do the odds, with zombies spawning relative to the most experienced survivor. Unfortunately, this can lead to some weird conversations and table maths when the group have strange discussions like, wait, let me kill the zombies. If you kill them, we'll just get more zombies spawning, which is an awkward disruption to the lightning pace that this game is trying to achieve. Also, and it may come as a surprise, player death is a rarity in this game, or at least you want it to be, because any death is an instant game over in Zombicide. And when was the last time you saw a zombie movie where everyone made it to the end? But it does reaffirm in this game that survival is the absolute key objective. Finally, we have Last Night on Earth, a slower experience than Zombicide, but more zoomed out than something like Dead of Winter. Each time you play this game, you're going to be using one of several scenarios. Maybe you're trying to fill up a truck so you can get out of town, or save the townsfolk, or maybe you're just trying to burn the town to the ground. But while this game isn't unique in having a scenario system, it goes heavily into this system with unique conditions and objectives so that the game can create a strong sense of narrative tension and unique play sessions. Combat is hard to avoid, and while simple, it's just risky enough that it's scary. Zombies can be held off easily enough, but actually putting them down is much harder, requiring the survivor to roll doubles, or with the help of a weapon. This means that zombies stick on the board and eventually they're going to overwhelm you and get the better of your plucky heroes. Each of the characters have their own little backstories and powers relating to them, so you quickly will grow attached to these weird photoshoot characters and their weird photoshoot equipment. So when you do lose weapons and survivors, and you will lose weapons and survivors, it feels personal and weighty. It also feels thematically appropriate to the schlocky B-movie that not everyone does make it out. Once again, these three games offer very different experiences when it comes to those survival elements. The planning of Dead of Winter, the panic of Zombicide, and the damned if you do, damned if you don't of Last Night on Earth. But now that we've seen those different elements, how does it all come together? By this point, I really hope I've shown just how different these three games are from each other. But what do each of them bring to the table? Personally, I've always been really surprised by just how much range these three games have. I've played a lot of zombie games that felt very, very similar. And while these games have some mechanical and certainly thematic similarities, they really bring different narratives to your table. Which of these games is going to be the best for you and your group is really going to depend on what kind of experience you're looking for. If you want a game that evokes tension and uncertainty of a grimy Armageddon, then it just has to be Dead of Winter. Paranoia and long-lasting, meaningful decisions come together with the crossroad cards to create an evocative and storied experience that's bound to create some memorable games with your group. However, this game can feel actively exhausting. It runs pretty long, and in bigger games, the downtime can really get big when players have 4 or more survivors each in each of their parties, and each one's going out doing things. It can really start to drag. Also, just at the end of longer games, I'm just emotionally exhausted. You really have to get into the right mindset to play this game. The game has that as a strength and as a weakness. It pulls you in with its themes and narrative, but at the end of it, you can just be really tired. And for some players, that's going to just turn them right off. The longer game with the time investment and those darker themes will just not be for everybody. Last Night on Earth is very dedicated to its B-movie aesthetic and goes to great lengths for it, from its photo art to included soundtrack CD. The gameplay was designed to create those classic movies like Night of the Living Dead or Evil Dead. Characters and art are evocative, and you'll definitely get your players into character and doing voices for these small-town heroes. It can, in my mind, feel a little over-dedicated to these homages, though, creating an experience that's less about player agency and more about a pursuit of theme. The box has, by some standards, relatively little in it. Plenty of gameplay, but not so much on the component front. And I do believe that CD I just mentioned is a contributing factor to this. It's all but useless to modern audiences. I mean, even if you have a CD player, I've certainly never used the thing. It's all online, and I've always used there. I've also found that while I don't dislike this game by any strokes, I feel that the scenarios, despite the different objectives and conditions, tend to play out relatively similar to each other. The base game experience doesn't have a huge amount in the hero deck in terms of variety, and so you're always looking for those same particular items. Finally, Zombicide has by far the most cartoony approach to this subject matter, heavily leaning into that power fantasy that accompanies those zombie movies. Survivors tear through the horde, while players are given ample opportunity to feel like a badass in their own right. After a while, the thinner veneer of narrative kind of disappears under mountains of plastic that you'll be excited to kill, but can lead to some of the missions feeling virtually the same. But that gameplay loop is very enjoyable. I've played Zombicide the most times. It's easy to set up and smash through the undead, and I don't feel nearly as tired as I do after a session of the others. So which of these is the best of three? Well, unfortunately, there's not really a fair answer to that question. If you're looking for a zombie game, I highly recommend all three of these games. But which one is the best for you and your group? Unfortunately, it's going to depend on you and your friends and what sort of experience you're looking for. I do hope in this video I've shown just how different these games are from each other. But to go through a whole video called Best of Three and then not say one is a real cop-out. So, if we're talking from a gameplay design perspective, I'm going to go with Dead of Winter. Dead of Winter here, I think, is a unique design in the zombie field. It's got deep emotional and narrative choices, very meaningful player agency and interaction, and those crossroad cards are delightfully unique in not just the zombie genre, but board gaming as a whole. But it's not the game that I play the most. Because I mentioned of what I've mentioned earlier, Dead of Winter is like a real time investment and emotional investment. So if I'm looking for a quick zombie thrill, and by quick I mean around 60 to 90 minutes, I lean towards Zombicide. It's the game I've played the most. I love the chaos and the power in it, and it's a much easier sell to newer players. So, at the end of the day, I think that the best designed game is Dead of Winter, but the one that I've played the most is Zombicide. Sorry, Last Night on Earth, I do really like you, but you're third. So, anyway, thank you so much for watching this first in Best of 3. I do hope you enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing for more board game content like this and reviews and other things. Thanks so much for watching.